So I'm Courtney Blazon, and I'm an artist and illustrator here in Missoula. And I do a lot of my work sort of based on historical things. So having a residency here is kind of makes sense for me. I've not done a ton specifically about Missoula, so I thought this would be a great opportunity to sort of do, to focus my attentions on what's going on here. And I'm particularly interested in prostitution in Western Montana in the era of the 1880s and 1890s. And Missoula's history with that is a little mysterious. It's not like Butte or even Helena, where there's still a lot of the remnants of that are still visible to the naked eye. If you were to go to Butte, you would see the old brothels, some of them that were still in some sort of condition into the 1920s. Missoula's area of town, which was called the Badlands, which was the 200 and 300 block of West French Street, basically lasted from, Ted, do you think the 1880s to the early 1900s?
Yeah, there was some weird morality push.
Yeah.
In the 1900s, and it kind of ran them out of downtown.
Yeah, so there was kind of a morality that, and then they got pushed to, there was brothels on Woody Street and then the railroad tracks, and then women, I think, just were probably actually walking the streets at some point. So I wanted to sort of start my research here regarding that, but it turns out I really like to do research, so I've spent most of my weeks here now just really accumulating a lot of information about the Badlands, about Missoula at the time, and particularly about the Chinatown that was part of the West Front Street. Hell's Half Acre is what it was called a lot in the newspaper. And so that's sort of where my research has brought me. It's also sort of brought me to research other brothels in the Missoula area. And I've discovered that one of the saloons that was in at where now is Applebee's was a brothel or a saloon called 4 Mile Exchange, and that was a series of brothels and saloons that were primarily there that serviced the infantrymen that were here at Fort Missoula, and there's a lot of really amazing stories surrounding that. So I've done a few things sort of as studies for what I hope to do as a larger project, which is to recreate the Badlands in a narrative drawing that's really large. That is going to be a lot of, it's just going to take me a long time to get there. It takes me a long time to piece everything together when I'm trying to, like, for instance, the main madam in that area was Mary Gleim, and she has never been photographed, or if she has, it's not known to anybody in town. So I've kind of got to piece a lot of things together. But through TED, I've had a lot of great meetings with different people in town. Like I went to the anthropology department today and spent 2 hours seeing all the artifacts they found under Cranky Sam's, which were half Chinese artifacts and then half artifacts relating to the brothel community or the prostitution community. And so that was extremely enlightening. So yeah, and I take a lot of notes. So that's one of my, before I do any art, I kind of just, I'm a note taker. So you guys are welcome to look at my silly notes. Yeah, so I thought like I would just make these sort of portraits of prostitutes based on what I read in the newspaper. So like this is about a girl named Clarabelle who came from Butte. She had a bad reputation in Butte. She stole money from a Chinaman. The marshal was able to get the money back, And then the police report was basically, we're keeping our eye on Clarabelle. So I wanted to show what a prostitute would look like more traditionally if you thought about like this sassy kind of broad that's like, I'm taking charge. But that's not really the reality. Like, their lives were extremely difficult, extremely painful. And she might have been, if she had had, the women who had madams or lived in the more fancy parlor houses, boarding houses, would have had a much easier time. They had somebody protecting them. But if a lot of these women just were in cribs that were just the size of a bed with, you know, a basin and a kerosene lantern, and they had no protection. So maybe somebody can help me with I don't know, does anybody have any questions about this? I just kind of, it's vellum with like wax crayon. And,
yeah, tell me when you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, I guess let's flip it over and, okay.
You want to do it?
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So I also wanted to do kind of a series of larger scale drawings of women's faces who that maybe had a more reality to the situation, or more of the sort of the evocation of maybe what they were up against. But for me, these are all just studies until I can sort out how to make like an 8-foot drawing that illustrates this part of town that is sort of forgotten. Yeah, I don't know. It's been a lot. I mean, my head is so full. I'll be honest, it's hard for me to even know what to say because I'm steeped up above my brain level, full of information, which I know will serve me for like a long time to come. And that's what I've been using this residency as, is an experience of like just saturation, and really learning so much about the community and really how diverse it was at one point, especially in that area. So. Oh. Like my sketches are like this. Yeah, I just do thumbnails. I like to, like for these I don't do anything because these to me are more sketches. But for my larger narrative drawings, I basically do like, if it's an 8-foot drawing, I basically do an 8-inch drawing and then just scale it up. But the notes are basically what I rely on. So sometimes I don't even do the sketch, I'll just put notes for where things go because I don't want to have to I already kind of can see the compositions in my brain. So I more just want to remember what needs to go there. So I'll write like, ladies flowered hanky right here, or whatever the example is. But yeah, I'm much more of a word-based person, which is so silly to say, but I react more to words, like, and so I guess I express myself with words as well. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't planned on specifically doing anything about Fort Missoula, but now that I found out about this brothel, the brothel there, I definitely want to include that. That's so interesting. It's mostly the names that they've given this area of town, or what the code names for prostitutes, and are so fascinating to me that it's almost given the whole project this fairy tale quality, which I don't want to, I mean, it's not like I'm pressing into it, but there's almost something like the Missoulian is not there's not even reporting in it. So it's like they treat these women as if they were like perfumed fairies who were floating around in clouds of opium on one hand, or just like blatant criminals who just would rob you for your shoes. And so those sort of the way that things have been described have really, like, they call it the demimonde, like the half-life. That's the area. Hell's Half Acre, the Midway Plaisance, a lot of French terminology to refer to, I think, to make the prostitutes seem more exotic. The Mauvais Terres, Nymphe du Pauve, which is my favorite one, like the nymph on the streets, the Cabbage Patch. Oh my gosh. And there's so many things that I see as things that could connect to my imagery. The other thing that has been really interesting to me is how important the Chinese New Year is in every year in the newspaper. The talk about the Chinese New Year's is really, it's like the most alive, that it's the most sense you get of the Chinatown that there is in terms of description, and that's really given me a much bigger idea of that. And then the Chinese graveyard on Cherry Street, and there's an article about the procession of the Chinese to bury their dead there. And so stories like that have really given me a much fuller picture, and just the rowdiness. I mean, I think I've spent like 40 plus hours researching just this aspect of it and looking up different prostitutes' names and different terminology like Cabbage Patch, and it's brought me to somewhere different every time. So yeah, I think I'm just shocked that it was a wild place and not without a lot of crime. So, or with a lot of crime. That was a silly way to say that. She said historically, she knows I've done bodies of work that have been about history, but is this my first time delving into Missoula history? And it is. I think that's what's exciting to me, is kind of doing something, because when you live in a place, sometimes it's easy to go, oh, it's not that interesting here. I don't really want to. And I didn't know sort of the depth of what I feel like I've now uncovered, or what seems exciting to me. So it actually kind of made me stultified, or like kind of stopped me in my, because I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much that I could. Now I'm just trying to get it all together. But I have practiced, because I had a show at the MAM that had a lot of research involved with it, and if I spent a year on the project, probably 9 months of it was researching and figuring out how to get it all together. So that might be the same this time around, but I'm patient with myself. I'm not patient with other people, but I'm patient with myself. Yeah, I was looking at him because I'm not very patient. He knows that. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So she asked if I would sort of cite my sources so people could investigate more, if I was to make a piece that was really full of information. And I did that for my last show too, where I had the piece, and it was annotated so that you could see. And some people don't want that experience, and then some people do. So I do think that's an important part, because there's nothing in those pieces that I do that are really huge, which I now feel I should have an example of, so you can at least see what I'm planning on doing. Yeah, that like everything is in there for a reason. So yeah, I would have an annotated sort of aspect of it. I will say, I just want to say one more thing about another character who was here briefly in Missoula in 1893, whose name was Big Bertha. And this is thanks to Ted that he got me on to Big Bertha. But speaking of the most interesting people, she was a confidence woman from Ireland who traveled across America conning men, and she made her way to Missoula after a con in Spokane, and she owned the Mascot Theater, which was on, was that on Front Street too?
Yeah, it was right across from the gym.
Okay, right across from the gym. So she owned it for 3 months, and she came here with a woman who was a performer of some sort, and I didn't think there was any cross or anything. Mary Gleim was the main madam on the street, and then Brig Bertha, and they're both these big women with big personalities. But then I eventually found an article that described a fight that they had where Mary Gleim pulled off Big Bertha's wig on the street, and I just about, felt like the gold mine of all gold mines for me, just like to know that these two women had an interaction. And I also like there was no men involved. It was just these two like very take charge women. And when you're dealing with a body of work that's about prostitution, like it's hard to find the stories of women being able to be in charge of themselves. So yeah, blah blah blah. Okay. I feel like I said enough. Oh, good. You have a question. Okay. Right. So she asked if I was able to find anything out about the origin of these women who were prostitutes, and the answer is no. They just don't have any. They're like forgotten. They were not considered worthy of until they did something salacious or. I mean, I'm so curious about the fate of most of these women, and particularly the fate of the children that are in some of these stories. There was a story of at the 4 Mile House, a woman left her 12-year-old daughter to fend for herself at one of the brothels there while she went to a brothel on West Front Street. And like, you just can't imagine the fate of these young people, and then also the women, and so you just never know. Most of them, even you wonder if that was their real name, or if it was just a name that they gave themselves. Yeah, I think there's still a few people in town at the university who have a little bit more knowledge about the prostitution in Missoula, and I'm gonna reach out to them and maybe they'll have more, but I think these were women who didn't have any records, really, that I know of.